What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
Let's get right on into it. I'm watching the news here today, and as you know, there were two immigration bills that went before Congress. One of them has already been voted down. The other one has been delayed. And these are bills that are seeking to legally implement the intent of Trump's executive order of keeping the families together at the border. But the reason the bills are not going anywhere is the Republicans and the Democrats have two different approaches to immigration, as we already know. The Republican approach to immigration is, okay, let's keep the families together and send them back home. And the Democrats, of course, want something else. They want to keep the families together and give them amnesty, let them into the country, let them move to places that are already marginally red states, and give them the right to vote. And so they're basically slugging it out in Congress, and it's a turf war between the Republicans and the Democrats. And of course, meanwhile, the business of the American people goes ignored and neglected in the midst of all this partisan infighting. So it's a rather depressing spectacle to watch, and we're going to have a little bit more about the immigration issue further on in the show. But as usual, because this immigration issue is being fanned up by the corporate media to distract from the Inspector General report, that, of course, is where we're going to be starting our program with. Now, 8 House Republicans are demanding that Michael Horowitz, the Inspector General for the Department of Justice, provide Congress with more information about these anti-Trump FBI employees mentioned in his bombshell report. There are quotes coming from them, but their names are withheld. They're called Agent 1, Agent 2, Agent 86, Agent 99. Who knows what that is all about. But they want the names, saying that the information is needed in the interest of justice and transparency, because obviously it needs to be known just where these anti-Trump FBI agents are right now. And we know that two of them, who have already been identified, are in fact part of the Mueller investigative team. And Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, prior to their embarrassment with their text messages, had also been involved in the investigation as well. So where are the others? Where are the others? Are they also on Mueller's team? Are they also out there trying to undermine a sitting American president? We need to know that. By the way, today is also the summer solstice, so longest day of the year for the Northern Hemisphere. But coming on back here, it is becoming very obvious from the IG report that Donald Trump wasn't obstructing anything. Because he had every right to fire James Comey over Comey's poor job performance. And again, given that Mueller's team has found no evidence of Trump-Russia collusion, which is what he's supposed to be looking for, there was nothing to obstruct. What we've been seeing all along is a partisan railroading. A rather major one. In fact, it's a partisan bullet train, in fact. That's what's been going on for 18 months. And I have to tell you, I do wish that Donald Trump would seize the opportunity of the IG report. He's got the moral high ground right now. And unfortunately, my perception is that he has demonstrated that he is, in fact, easy to manipulate. Because apparently he doesn't seem to understand that the reason the Democrats started fanning up this whole immigration and children separation thing right now was specifically to distract from the IG report and to deny Donald Trump that political victory. And Trump seems to have gone along with it. He caved in, he signed the executive order. He sent Melania down there to the child care center, which is a good thing because it turned out to not be the concentration camp, death camp that the Democrats were saying. But he basically is letting the Democrats call the shots. He's lost the initiative. And now's the time when he should be gaining it to fight back. All right, let's talk about the war zones because there is a lot going on over there. Fighters of the Syrian Arab Army and the Tiger Forces have liberated the villages of Musakyak and Al-Dalhafa from militant groups in northeastern Daraa. Thus, the de facto besieged militant-held area, well, they basically are cutting off the supply lines to the militant-held area. So now all they got to do is sit back and wait, and sooner or later, the lack of food, the lack of water, the lack of medicine, the lack of ammunition, they will surrender. All right, we're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. So the Syrian government forces are starting to push this offensive in the southwest, and it's a very, very touchy situation. Because the U.S. has already been saying, don't you dare go into this area, because that's where we are. And that's also where the remaining ISIS and Al-Qaeda forces are, under the protection, apparently, of the United States. And, of course, Syria's response is, well, why are you there anyway? You have no right to be here. We didn't ask you to be here. You don't have our permission to be here. You don't have a United Nations Security Council resolution to be here. You don't have a declaration of war from your Congress to be here. What the heck are you doing here? And so there's been a war of words that's been building up between the two. But Syria's going on in. They want to finish up this battle against these U.S.-backed jihadi groups. But we're seeing from this article over in Zero Hedge that this battle for southwest Syria could trigger U.S. and Israeli intervention. Now, Israel's point of view, of course, is they want to keep that Golan Heights. Israel claims it is theirs. The U.S. says it's disputed. The rest of the world says it's occupied. And Israel is lobbying for the U.S. To recognize Israel's sovereignty over all that oil and gas. And apparently after the blowback from moving the embassy to Jerusalem, the U.S. government has backed off on that one. And Israel's throwing a tantrum. We want it now. We want it now. But apparently there is a concern that the U.S. will seize Syria's military operations inside Syria as a reason to intervene yet again under whatever excuse. Maybe they're going to have another false flag chemical weapon attack. They're going to go back to saying that they're really there to fight ISIS and Al-Qaeda, which is going to be a hard sell because they're kind of like sitting next to each other and taking selfies and so forth and so on. But we know that the United States does not want to give up on Syria. First of all, because there's a pipeline right-of-way involved. They still want Bashar al-Assad out of there and a puppet ruler in. But most importantly, the United States right now, with all these wars going on all over the world, it cannot be seen to lose any of them. Or U.S. public support for the wars will evaporate and the wheels will come off the war wagon. I don't even know that there's that much support for the current wars. The U.S. is engaged officially in 7 different wars. According to Bernie Sanders, the United States is militarily engaged in 76 countries. We don't even know where the U.S. government is mucking about with other people's countries. We don't know what those 76 are. But if there's a major loss, either in Syria or Afghanistan, it's all going to start to unravel. And that's why the U.S. is going to stay in Afghanistan and stay in Syria, no matter how much of other people's money and children they have to spend to do it. Speaking of Afghanistan, the United States bombing spree in Afghanistan has reached record levels, not seen since at least 2009, according to a new report from Air Force Central Command. And the increase in attacks comes 17 years since the U.S. invaded the country in an effort to oust the Taliban from power. Now, I find it interesting that the United States is escalating the airstrikes into Afghanistan at a time when the Afghan government and the Taliban are trying to get together and have peace talks to end all of this. But as of May 2018, the U.S. had dropped 2,339 weapons from the Afghan skies since the start of the year. And May saw the deployment of 591 munitions in Operation Freedom Sentinel. Where do they come up with these names? More than any other month since October 2017. Isn't it amazing, these ridiculous names they come up for these operations? It's just pure propaganda here. Russia is obviously still concerned about NATO's increasing the arming and manning of the border with Russia. And Russia is saying they're going to have to respond equally. So they got the Cold War back, because that's what it is. We're going to put people and we're going to put weapons on there, and we're going to loot our country's population for the money to do all this, because the military-industrial complex is what makes this country great. Do you know how right Eisenhower was? And this is proving it all over again. The civilian government isn't in control of the military-industrial complex. The defense contractors are. They just hand out enough money to members of Congress and presidents, and it's all going to work. You know, they'll get the contracts. They'll build all these weapons in all these companies across the United States, and because it's a Cold War, heck, it doesn't really matter if they don't really work. They just have to look impressive. You know, and we'll rig the tests so that they go through the approval process. It's a big scam. It's a big, giant scam. And back in the 50s and 60s, when I was a kid watching the first Cold War, it was impoverishing the American people. Now, back then, because of the aftermath of World War II, between Bretton Woods and the United States being a manufacturing powerhouse that marketed to the entire world, we could afford a Cold War. We can't anymore. We're not a manufacturing powerhouse. Bretton Woods is evaporating. They're literally borrowing the money to maintain this war posturing. All right, so we're back to that situation. NATO puts more tanks on the border. Russia brings up more tanks. NATO puts more troops on the border. Russia brings up more of their troops. NATO brings up more missiles. Russia brings up more missiles. And all it's going to take is one mistake to get things going. And one of the things that most Americans don't understand is how dangerously close we came to nuclear war during that first Cold War. Everybody knows about the Cuban Missile Crisis, but there were some near misses caused by accidents, by stupidity, by people overreacting. There was one case where one of the early warning radars indicated a Russian missile was flying over the pole heading for the United States, and they were on the verge of launching against that when somebody realized there had been an electronics failure. Now, we've all seen the movie War Games. That's actually based on a real story. Now, there wasn't a kid on a computer hacking into Cheyenne Mountain, but there was an instance where somebody put on a training tape to the system and ran it without announcing it was a training session. It was an oversight. It was a stupid mistake. And the people at those consoles were seeing all this information displayed indicating a Russian attack, and they're nearly launched. Do we really want to be back in that kind of a hair-trigger situation? I don't think so. And it's all being done, and that risk is being taken just to make the defense contractors were rich. I keep thinking back to Eisenhower's farewell address where he talked about the military-industrial complex, and to his famous Cross of Iron speech. And if you have not read that, you need to look it up online and read that speech. Eisenhower knew what war was. He'd been through it. And he became, in the end, one of our most anti-war presidents that we've ever had. As opposed to presidents and politicians who've never actually had to be in a war, and they think it's cool. It's a fun thing to do, a good way to make money, run up our stock portfolio. It's not our kids. Who cares, right? All right, there's an article that we saw today. As you know, much of America's military might, perceived military might, is based around our carrier battle force and the carrier attack groups, which consists obviously of a carrier and its screening escorts, guided missile cruisers, guided missile destroyers, dedicated sub-hunting ships, usually a submarine. It varies from carrier to carrier, but they are an awesome force out in the open water. But military analysts are now saying that if the U.S. aircraft carriers went into the Baltic Sea, they'd basically be like fish in a barrel, because the Russian high-speed anti-ship weapons can fly all the way across the Baltic Sea. There would be no way, no place for the carriers to retreat to once they were in there. And there's a lot of concern about how effective our carriers are and how vulnerable they are, and not just because of what's been happening with the Gerald R. Ford. And as I've mentioned before, history is repeating itself. When we were going into World War II, the naval doctrine was that the battleship was the mainstay of the naval fleet. That was going to control and dominate all battles. Why? Well, because that's the ship that had won World War I. And so in the years between World War I and World War II, the Navy improved on and built newer and better battleships. And yes, the aircraft carrier had kind of come along, but the Navy sort of viewed it as, well, it's kind of nice to have, but it won't be that important in World War II. Then, of course, World War II came along and proved exactly the opposite. The aircraft carriers were the main projector of power, and the battleships, while they did have a few spectacular battles, were relatively obsolete. And they were, after World War II, the ones that hadn't been sunk were retired. They were briefly revived for like Vietnam and the Gulf War, but now they're sitting in museums like the one we have at the bottom of the hill. And the naval doctrine is the aircraft carrier determines the battles. Why? Well, because that's what won in World War II. But we're now talking about World War III, and we're talking about military peers with high technology who have clearly been thinking outside the box. And they're not burying vast amounts of their resources in these behemoth carriers. You know, they're going for these hypersonic ship-killing missiles. I think it was about 4 years ago, there was a little bit of an embarrassment where the Joint Chiefs called in one of the Navy's top admirals and said, what is the life expectancy of our aircraft carriers if we go to war against Russia or China? And the admiral said, it'll be about a week, maybe 2 if you keep them in port, which was definitely not the answer that the Joint Chiefs wanted to hear. But again, looking at the quality of the weapons, the problems they're having with the Gerald R. Ford. This is supposed to be a brand new ship, and already it's got drivetrain problems. That electromagnetic catapult system is actually cracking the tow hooks on aircraft. They can't dial that in. The supposed synchronized radar system won't synchronize. And the Navy is saying they made a mistake. Too much whiz-bang on one platform. And that there are serious concerns whether it'll ever actually be ready to go into combat. Because it isn't right now. It's like the F-35. It looks impressive, but it's not ready to go into combat. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And once again, if you would care to support Republic Broadcasting Network, and folks, we really do need your help. The postal address to send a check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity, cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Road, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. If you want to make a donation by credit card, or if you want to become a recurring subscriber, the phone number is 800-724-2719, extension 1 during business hours, extension 3 at all other times. Getting on back to the war zones and getting on back to the increasing hostilities with Russia. The Russian defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, is saying that NATO has no chance to take Crimea. And as you know, there has been a lot of talk between NATO and the United States about, rescuing Crimea. We've got to rescue Crimea, from those evil Russians who stole it, which of course is not at all what happened. So let's hit the rewind button and go back one more time for those people who are really in a state of denial. When the U.S. backed a coup d'etat against Ukraine's legitimate government and brought down Yanukovych, and they put in a puppet ruler, President Chocolate Poroshenko, the people of Crimea said, this is no longer a government of our choosing, and they held a referendum to secede from Ukraine, which passed overwhelmingly. And it is their right to do that under the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Everybody has a right to self-determination. Then they held another referendum about rejoining or joining the Russian Republic. And that one passed overwhelmingly. And they applied to join the Russian Republic, and the Russian Republic said, certainly. Heck, we all speak the same language anyway. And that's what actually happened. But the United States and NATO are taking the position of refusing to recognize the right of the people of Crimea to vote to secede, even though, again, those NATO nations and the United States are all members of the United Nations, and they are bound by that Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But their attitude is, we do not recognize the right of the Crimean people to make such a decision. Therefore, by default, Russia has stolen Crimea, which, as I've said before, is like being at a wedding and one of the wedding guests doesn't recognize the bride's right to choose the groom. Therefore, by default, the groom has kidnapped and raped the bride. That's how the thinking goes in NATO and Washington, D.C. So there's been a lot of talk about rescuing Crimea. We have to take it back from those evil Russians who stole it. And Russia is basically sending a message saying, no, you won't. And the message is an attempt to do so will bring the United States and NATO and Russia into direct conflict, and that is really going to be tempting fate. Over in Germany, their defense minister, Ursula von der Leyen, is promising the United States there will be significant defense budget increases. As you know, one of the things that Trump is lobbying for is that the other NATO nations pick up a fairer share of funding NATO, because right now, most of that money for NATO comes from the United States, comes from you. And so some of the other NATO nations are saying, yeah, we'll spend a little bit more. But I don't think it's going to change the reality. Most of NATO is still paid for by the United States taxpayer. And NATO is supposed to be a mutual defense organization, and yet in recent years, it has clearly been turned into the United States attack dog, because the United States keeps attacking nations that have done no wrong to us. And that is the hallmark of an aggressor rogue state, when they make war on countries that have not attacked us. They make up convenient lies so that you'll feel okay with it, like Saddam's got nuclear weapons and Assad is using sarin gas on his own people. But the reality is, we know who the aggressor is, and it's the United States of America. Alrighty, over on Sputnik, they're quoting Russia's foreign ministry spokesman, Maria Zakharova, saying the U.S. had demonstrated a deep disregard for the United States, and not to mention double standards, by trying to ram its policy through regarding Israel and Palestine, and then when they didn't get what they wanted, pulling out from the UN Human Rights Council. And it's looking to the world like Nikki Haley and Mike Pompeo have basically handed over control of U.S. foreign policy to Israel. Well, It's great everybody's starting to recognize that, but it's been a reality for quite some time. All right, we're going to take another break here for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking about the various wars going around here, and apparently the U.S. State Department has issued yet another warning to the Russian and Syrian governments regarding the operations in southwest Syria. And the United States is basically claiming that Syria is operating in a de-escalation zone negotiated between the United States, Jordan, and the Russian Federation last year. Now, there is an issue here where the de-escalation zones were intended to provide an area of safety for the civilian population, and not just as a you can't come here hideout for ISIS and Al-Qaeda. But that's the position the United States is taking. And I guess at this point it's only a matter of time before we actually do see conflict between U.S. forces and Syrian forces, and inevitably the Russians, to some extent, will get involved because Syria is using a lot of their weapons. To nobody's surprise, Benjamin Netanyahu is out there singing the praises of the United States for leaving the United Nations Human Rights Council, because after all, the UN Human Rights Council, they're just so horribly biased against Israel. They're a bunch of anti-Semitic Jew haters over there at the United Nations. That makes one foreign leader who has approved of what Trump did. And the rest, of course, are absolutely appalled. And again, the optics on this need to be fully considered. How does it look when the United States government, supposedly the mightiest nation on earth, is dancing around on Israel's puppet strings? It's a little humiliating, I think. Most Americans should be very embarrassed by the behavior of the United States government here. There's been another video that has come on out, which unfortunately is painting a very negative picture of Israel. And it has to do with how last July in 2015, there was an 18-month baby. Ali Saad Dawabash was killed in an arson attack by Jewish right-wing terrorists in the Palestinian family's home in Duma, which is a town in the West Bank. And the toddler's parents also died from their injuries within weeks of the attack. The couple had another child, 5 years old, survived, although obviously severely burned. And some of these right-wing terrorists were arrested, amazingly enough, and they were taken to court. And the family of these Palestinians, obviously following the case, were in court. And apparently the court is trying to decide whether or not the fact that these right-wing Jewish terrorists admitted doing this, in fact seemed proud of it, is admissible as evidence. And on their way out of the courtroom, some of these ultra-right-wing protesters were chanting, where is Ali? Ali's dead. Ali's on the grill. I mean, celebrating the fact that this Palestinian baby was burned to death. And it was got on video, and it's gone viral around the globe. I think this one is probably going to supersede that video of the drunk Israeli settler, you know, screaming at the Palestinians to leave their home because God gave that land to him. But one of the family members of the assassinated family was out there saying these racist, barbaric chants indicate that these far-right protesters' natural place is a zoo. And it's kind of hard to argue about that. I mean, it's one thing to be in a conflict with somebody, but the kids should be off limit. But this Jewish terrorist group, this settler group, they just go into these Palestinian towns and they hurl firebombs into the homes to try and drive them out. And they're killing people, including little babies, apparently without one iota of shame over what they have done. All right, let's take a phone call. Terry in California. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, I hope I'm not getting too far off the subject, but I want to make a comment about some of your remarks about our coming economic collapse. And, you made some comments about, Soviet Union style, and then you said some things about how we want to put it back together, like the first 13 amendments of the Bill of Rights and all that kind of stuff. Well, I don't think we're going to have that choice. I don't think it's going to be like Russia. There's not going to be a Putin out there waiting to come in and put it all back together. I think it's already settled. The Zionist bankers are going to bring it down, and I'm sure they got a plan to grab power as soon as that happens, and to put back the country in the plan they already have in place. I don't know. I don't think we're going to be able to come back like a new nation and do it right this time, because they have, like as you said, they got control of our country. And
yeah, but if the country collapses, if the governing structure of the country collapses, they lose control. And the American people are going to get a serious, ice bucket challenge in the face. And they're going to stand up and realize, we have to run this country for ourselves. And that's why our job is to start educating our fellow Americans about the evils of private central banking so that it doesn't get a chance to restart itself in our country.
Well, agreed. But I think that, they already have a plan what's going to do with the finances. They're going to switch the dollar over, reset it to something else.
The dollar's going to be worthless. And, you're not understanding. When I say a Soviet Union style collapse, I'm talking about it's all coming down. The economy, the value of the dollar, the governmental system. We're going to be right back down to basically the United States of America and the American people and nothing else. The bankers will have no levers or handles to grab onto to control us, because that's the governing structure, and that's what's going to be coming apart. And the American people are not going to be in a mood to let somebody come on in and say, let's just go back to doing the things that we were doing before, because the vast majority of Americans have been seeing their quality of life in decline for 30 years now. They're tired of just struggling just to pay the bills, and they're very, very angry. They're very angry over the fact that all of our government institutions seem to be on the side of the large corporations. They're certainly not taking care of the American people. There's a lot of anger out there. And, if we have a Soviet Union-style collapse, there won't be anything for the bankers to grab. We could even see the United States balkanize. I mean, they're already talking about splitting California into 3 separate states. We could go back to just the individual sovereign states with no central federal government. There would be the nation of Hawaii, which we've been a nation before here. There'd be a nation of Florida, 3 nations of California, a nation of Texas, all of us taking care of our own business in our own way, because all of these evils that we see, whether it's war or private central banking, are achievable only when there are large imperial structures binding all these states together. That certainly was not the way it was supposed to be when this country was started. This country was started on the idea that all of these states were separate nations. They were in a loose confederation under the governance of the central federal government. It's the same scam they pulled on the European Union. But over time, both Washington, D.C. and Brussels basically arrogated more power to themselves and became more tyrannical in the process.
Well, I see your point. I'm thinking what they might try to do before that happens is say our currency is no longer in effect, but now we got this new currency. It's a digital currency. And of course, they can have a digital currency. All you have to do is come up with the ones and zeros. And whether...
Well, that's the vast majority of our currency is already ones and zeros. But I think Americans are becoming, first of all, highly suspicious of this idea of a cashless society. Second of all, just on a practical level, we're seeing so many of these digital currency systems fail. I got another email from somebody just the other day saying they'd gone down to their local store, was cash only. because the system had broken down. We had the same thing. Claire and I went to a fast food restaurant right about the time of one of her choir rehearsals. Same thing. Machines down, cash only. People like the idea of having cash. They want what they have earned in their own pocket. And I think most people, they welcome the convenience of a plastic card, but they want some of their wealth still in their pocket, in their home, buried in a mayonnaise jar out by the pineapple plantation. It gives them a feeling of security to have some of their wealth under their own direct physical control. In any event, during the coming crash, there's going to be a lot that's going to come on out about how corrupt the government and the banking system was, and I think Americans are going to turn their back on that and say, we need to go back to something that's simple, we need to go back to something that's going to work for the people.
Yeah, and I think that's why people are buying silver and gold now, because they know, they're not going to, it would be like a Venezuelan type collapse as well as a Soviet type,
Oh, and, it's bad down in Venezuela. But Venezuela was brought down by the U.S. The U.S. has been working toward this for years.
Yeah. Absolutely. People don't realize that because they were out of the banking system, right?
Well, it's more a case of Venezuela selling their oil for currencies other than the dollar.
Right.
And Venezuela setting an example of taking that oil revenue and spending it on the Venezuelan people. And so the U.S. has been trying to get in to Venezuela since the time of Hugo Chavez. In fact, they staged a coup against him, but there was a counter coup a week later that put Hugo Chavez back into power. And the U.S. hates him for that, because you're not supposed to come back from a U.S. Regime change. They hate him for selling Venezuela's oil for currencies other than the dollar. Again, they think he's setting a really bad example for the rest of the world by saying that the government's responsibility is to care for the people.
Yeah, and that's why Pat Robertson said that they should assassinate Chavez, the Christian 700 Club guy,
Yeah. Well, I don't listen to him.
No, but anyway, I appreciate that. I hope you're right for a part of it. I know it's going to be very painful in transition, and anybody that's got dollars, they better get out of those and get in something else that's going to be means of exchange during the transition.
Absolutely. No question about that. All right, Terry, thank you very much.
Okay, Mike.
Yep.
Yeah. And it was nice talking to you. We'll talk to you again.
All right. Thank you for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about also the Soviet-style collapse. But, Mike, nobody listens. I mean, the people who still listen, like either Pat Robinson wannabes, just send a check and, God will love you for it. I'll buy another, plane, right? Like, these people are such scam artists. How people can still fall for this crap, from these evangelical preachers. Like, what was the guy in Texas who didn't open the doors to help the people?
Yeah. I mean, there. As I said before, good people will do good things, bad people will do bad things, and both will use religion as their excuse. There is no question there are a lot of scammers in the God biz. And I sort of had my eyes open regarding that because after I left CBS Television City, which came immediately after I told the CIA I didn't want to sabotage somebody's show for them, I went to work for a Christian television station in Orange, California, as their technical director. And they were in really sad shape because the manager of the station had gone to one of these tent revivals where the end of the world was being predicted. God is going to arrive on thus and such a day. And he actually came back to the TV station and he rededicated the station to getting the word out that the world was going to end on this date. God was going to come down and take up the faithful. Didn't run the commercials, didn't run the paid programming. The day came and God didn't show up. and the TV station was saddled with huge amounts of bills that the station manager honestly believed he was not going to have to pay. And so they were trying to get their audience back because they'd lost the audience and everything. And it was down to like a 3-hour broadcast day, which was the minimum you have to do to keep your FCC license. And I was with them for a little while, and it was a bizarre experience seeing how all of that stuff worked.
I think he already came. We all got left behind. You know?
Well, you know, great. Then there should be a lot of empty homes and, you know, ownerless cars out there for us to grab.
Hey, Mike, with the economic collapse or the collapse of the country, you know what's scary, though?
What?
The fighting we got, the infighting we got right now. Like, you know, in Washington, there's so many different factions, and then you got, like, the Blackwaters out there and stuff. I mean, if it happens here, we're going to be in some serious crap because it's going to be a free-for-all at that point, you know? That's a scary... that'd be a scary time.
Well, it will be a very scary time. And you know all those people who are laughing at the preppers? They won't be laughing then. They really won't. And by the way, if you're a prepper, probably not a good idea to tell your neighbors about it because you're making yourself a target.
Yep. And, Mike, I got one more thing. I don't know if you heard Russia is going to be doing an ICBM test in the next 3 or 4 days.
Okay, well, good for them.
Okay. And that's all I got. Have a good show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are open again here. Now, Israel is still trying to deal with this public relations disaster coming out of Bloody Monday. And one of the areas where the world's condemnation is focused on was this baby who was killed by Israeli tear gas. And Israel originally tried to come on out and say, well, it's the mother's fault. What is she bringing a baby to the protest area for? Then it turned out actually the mother had gotten on the wrong bus and was just there and was nowhere near the fence, not even at the protest, but the tear gas hit her. So Israel is trying to get away from that one, and they've arrested a family member for terrorism. And somehow or other, he decided he was going to claim that the baby actually died from a fatal blood condition that runs in the family. She just happened to coincidentally die just as the tear gas hit her. Talk about a Bex alert. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're going to go back to the phones. Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show, and what's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I just got a kick out of your call with Terry and talking about the evangelists. And I just wanted to recount a couple. I always have found great humor in these guys. And there was, without mentioning names, there were two of the scams that hit me the best were there was a guy that was out here in Upland, California, that was saying back in the 80s that if you sent him he was collecting money because he wanted to float Bibles behind the Iron Curtain on helium balloons. That was his scam. And there was one more guy that was really great that was that said if you sent him $10 or more, he would send you back a consecrated dime. I'm not an accountant. I know there's a lot of profit in that transaction.
Oh my goodness! It's a shame I have a sense of morals, or I probably could have done very well in that business. I'm actually ordained in the state of California, which a lot of people find amazing, but that goes back to when I was in college, and I had to take some courses outside my major, so I took a journalism course, and one of the stories they assigned to me, this was during the Vietnam War, they sent me to interview this pastor of a church who was ordaining young men of military age so that they had a deferment for the draft. I mean, anyway, it was hundreds and hundreds were going through this, and I didn't need it because I already had an occupational deferment, but just to illustrate the story, he ordained me, And we wrote the story, and on the last day of class, I did communion with really cheap wine and cookies. You know, body of Christ with chocolate chip, body of Christ with chocolate chip. You're a sinner, you get an oatmeal cookie, and so forth and so on. But I've never used the ordination, obviously, but it's just one of those quirky little things that happens to people. But again, there are good people who are following their religion, and there are bad people who exploit and use religion. I'm trying to remember the name of that guy who said that if his viewers didn't send him some huge sum of money by the end of the month, God was going to call him home. And,
yeah, or it was Oral Roberts when he went up in the tower and didn't want to come down until somebody raised $5 million.
Oh, yeah.
I think he raised $5 million.
What a scam. What an absolute scam. And you're right. You have to wonder about people who are so enslaved by their belief system that they just go along with this. And he's just taking away from people who are, in all probability, already disadvantaged. And they don't really have it to give. Anyway.
Hey, Mike, can I, there's one more thing I wanted to bring up. There's people out there want to Google this. There's a strategic theory that was put out by a guy like around 1900, a British guy.
Okay, Peter, we're going to have to take a quick break for station identification. Stay on the line. I'm going to come right back to you. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're talking with Peter in Los Angeles. And if you would just sort of restart where you were.
Yeah, there's a strategic theory that was espoused by a guy named Mackinder, Mackinder, Mackinder. The theory is called the Mackinder Heartland Theory. And it was, he put this forth somewhere around 1900 or something. And strategic theory is all made up of always two things: geography and technology.
Yes.
And of course, the technology has changed dramatically since 1900, but the geography is every bit as much germane. And the Heartland Theory, basically, if you carve a big circle around Central Asia, Soviet Russia, Mongolia, Northern China, Iran, Southern Soviet Russia. That was what Mackinder called the heartland, with internal lines of communication that you could, of course, back then there was only the two-line Trans-Siberian Railroad, but now there's much different.
Yes.
And they're talking about the Silk Roads and all that. But his theory was, if you controlled that, then with interior lines of communication, you controlled the Eurasian landmass, and even Africa, really, because it's really attached. What our policy has done is to drive Russia, China, Iran, Pakistan, Turkey, all the countries that make up what Mackinder called the heartland, have all been driven, if not into alliances with themselves, at least antagonism with the United States.
Yes.
And with things like the Silk Road and all the trade things that are going on right now, and I really wish you take a look at that, because I've meant to talk to you about this for years, but I haven't gotten around to it. But at any rate, I think it's suicidal to go up against people that control the entire Eurasian landmass, both for economics or for military. At any rate, I just wanted to. It's called the Mackinder Heartland Theory, and give it a look sometime. And
yeah,
tell me what you think.
I'll give that a look here. I don't think anybody, or I hope that nobody in the Defense Department or Pentagon is thinking about a land war across that vast expanse. I think the idea is to use the threat of nuclear attack or of non-nuclear airstrikes on key strategic cities to coerce these countries into going along with the U.S. agenda. I can't imagine that anybody really wants a full-on ground war. except, of course, for those companies that are providing the boots and the uniforms and so forth. It would be a bad idea. Let's be honest.
It's a horrible idea. They used to say 2 rules of war: don't invade Russia, don't invade China. But this is, even with an economic war against these guys, with all the resources on that mainland, that landmass, and linked up with railroad and so on and so forth, it's ridiculous. And then the populations, of course.
Yes.
But that's what we've done. We've antagonized all those people that Mackinder defined as the heartland. Anyways, it was. And
we've antagonized a great deal of Europe as well. In fact, especially with this recent thing about pulling out of the UN Human Rights Council, I think the United States and Israel are isolating themselves from the rest of the world. They're becoming the new axis of evil. Like there was, Germany and Italy. All we need is a third one in there, and we're right back in the same formula for a new world war. 3 nations against everybody else.
You're absolutely right. But also look at the way, because Russia now is playing a key role right on Israel's border. Israel started it, and they got it, and Russia intervened and stopped them from getting what they wanted. But Israel has been forced to come to a lot of accommodation with Russia, because Russia has got a lot of what they need. They can't go into anywhere without Russia's acquiescence in their border areas now. And, all these
I'm not sure I agree with that, and that's because of that meeting between Netanyahu and Putin, where whatever was said in that room, Netanyahu convinced Putin not to sell the S-400 to Syria. And it was obviously not a pleasant discussion. If you remember that parade afterwards, where Putin was walking down the street, and Netanyahu, who kept trying to stand next to him, to get his little face on TV, and Putin was so, you could see it on Putin's face. Putin was just absolutely furious, and Putin's not a guy who loses his temper that easily. So he went over to the side, and he got this veteran, and had the veteran march beside him, pushing Netanyahu off to the side and into the background. So there was a little bit of game playing going on there. So Netanyahu's got something that he can use as leverage on Russia. And so I don't know that Israel needs Russia's acquiescence. I'm pretty sure that Israel has a lock on Russia almost as great as they do on, for example, Great Britain and the United States.
Well, they hate Russia for a couple reasons. Russia stopped them in Syria, and Putin threw out the Jewish oligarchs.
Yes,
that's 2 reasons why they hate them, and the central bank. But there's still a significant Jewish lobby in Russia. It's significant. Not like here.
So. I imagine so. To be technically correct, Putin did not throw out the central bank. He merely took control of it, so that Russia's public currency is managed as a public utility. But that's going to annoy central bankers all around the world. In fact, it's when he did that Russia went from being a good partner with the West to being on the top of the does not get a Christmas card list.
Oh, man. Well, at any rate, Israel has had to reach accommodation with Russia on rules of engagement over Syria. And spheres basically of influence. Don't attack my terrorists in southern, against the Golan or what have you, or try to restrain Syria from doing so. So, I'm already starting to see it. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm keeping my eye open now, because Russia has something that Israel wants, and only Israel can get from Russia. And so they're starting to cozy up to the Russians in a number of. It gives them. They're starting to disabuse us, because we're not the be-all, end-all that we used to be in that area.
They've sucked us dry. They're probably looking at the latest presents we're giving them, like the F-35, and saying, hey, this is a piece of junk. Let's go make friends with the Russians. And it's like any parasite. When they've used up one host, they leap onto another one. And maybe that was the reason Putin was so upset at the meeting, as he understands, what's happening, that Russia may be the next nation to fall under Israel's control.
Good luck with that. I hope Putin has more sense, I believe. But at any rate, that's it for me, Mike. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here, and the phone lines are open, and we're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. Today is World Refugee Day, and there's a lot of people out there talking about we have to take care of the refugees, and we shouldn't be stopping them at the border, and Europe's got to take more refugees, and, we've got all these poor refugees from Syria and Africa and all the rest of it. Actually, the largest population of refugees on Earth are the Palestinians. There are 5.9 million Palestinian refugees around the world. Somehow they don't get the news coverage that the other refugees do. Okay, let's take another phone call. John in Norfolk, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, it's actually Joe. I usually call you from Tennessee, but happen to be in Norfolk.
Okay.
I just wanted to talk about the false narrative of Russia interfering with our election, when it really was the British establishment that was interfering with our election. I mean, you look at Christopher Steele, and you look at this spy, Halperin. There's a big, huge English establishment connection between the demonization and false entrapment of the Trump campaign. And I think it all goes back to England being the abode of all the globalist bankers. And they really want to divide Trump from nationalist Russia with its national currency and bank. And I think that's really what's at the bottom of all this is the English establishment hatred and fear of the United States joining with Russia to destroy their little game that they played on the world for the last 300 or 400 years.
Well, obviously, I'm going to disagree with you on this because we know for a fact that Christopher Steele was just a hired hack, and he was hired by the Democratic National Committee, the Hillary Clinton campaign. We know that Halpern was paid a really large sum of money for his espionage into the Trump campaign. We don't yet know who his paymaster was. But I think the source of the tampering of the 2016 election was much closer to home. And certainly we're seeing from the Inspector General report that the FBI was essentially tampering with the 2016 election. And so I don't think we need to look much further afield for that. And as far as the allegations of Russian hacking, there's an interesting little story that has come on out where apparently when the story of Russian meddling or hacking of like the DNC computers first came on out, Susan Rice gave a stand-down order to cybersecurity saying, don't look at it. You don't want to go there. Now, obviously, Obama is not going to be protecting Russian hackers, so he was obviously protecting the Hillary campaign. And remember, the metadata on the information from the DNC server shows it wasn't downloaded over the internet. Somebody copied it onto a flash drive and walked it out of the building. Most likely person, Seth Rich, and he was assassinated for it.
Well, I do not disagree at all that the FBI and DOJ colluded against the Trump campaign. But I know that a lot of the signals intelligence came through MI6 and the Five Eyes program, which was through Britain. And that's what makes me say that there's a lot of connections in this whole scandal between the British intelligence system and the DNC. Oh, it was basically, let's put it this way, Hillary was the globalist candidate.
Yes.
DNC, FBI, whatever the labels you want to use, the establishment globalist candidate was Hillary, and the establishment globalist in the British establishment worked along with them to overthrow an election. And I hope Trump holds them to account. I hope Trump makes peace with Putin, alliance, and pivot towards Russia and Asia. I think that's in our interest. I think the Europeans have become so corrupted with liberalism and socialism and globalism that they're finished, as well as the immigration that's destroying their culture, that our one hope for our country is to become a nationalist nation and to get rid of our central banks. And we're not going to be able to do that as long as we're on good, friendly terms with the British, and we should, unless the British do go to the right or nationalist also. They need to
obviously they're going nationalist with the Brexit here. Now, I want to get back on what you were saying about MI6 and the Five Eyes program or echelon, because, MI6 apparently was involved in some of the spying on the Trump campaign, but that's what the Five Eyes system was designed to do, to allow governments or political opportunists to spy on their own people in ways that didn't violate the laws of their countries. The way it was set up by these 5 countries, and it did come out of the United States, the U.S. came up with the idea. The idea was that the U.S. government could spy on American citizens by having the British do it, or the U.S. would spy on British targets and Britain would spy on U.S. targets, and then they'd swap the data, and they would have the necessary intelligence or the intelligence they wanted without having violated their own domestic privacy laws, which this day and age don't seem to really apply all that much here in the United States anymore anyway.
No, we do that all over the world and get involved in other countries' elections as a nation ourselves.
Yes.
But my point is that Trump is in power now. He had these tools of the state used against him, and if anybody should be angry about it and do something about it, it's President Trump.
I agree with you on that one, and I'm wondering what it is that is constraining him from taking care of some of the stuff, especially since he campaigned on a lot of it. You know, draining the swamp, and prosecuting Hillary Clinton, and you have to wonder, how is it he is being constrained from doing his job? What have they got on him? Are they threatening him?
Well, I think he's waiting until he gets more of his pieces in place and protecting his family and his own life. I mean, these are dangerous critters he's going up against.
Agreed.
And I think that the smart move is to take your time and to get your people that you can trust in place. I'm sure right now he's testing his own people out to find out who the rats are and who the leakers are. So I really can't say I blame him much for taking his time. I like you, would love to have seen it happen. A lot of things happen sooner, but I think the wise move is to be cautious when you're dealing with such a bunch of entrenched snakes. So that's kind of my view. I mean, he can't trust anybody. These globalists are all over the place, whether it's the cultural angle or the financial angle or the money power or the DOJ, FBI. I mean, they're really, they've been thoroughly entrenched on every level. Oh,
yeah, they are. They really are. But again, Donald Trump is the president, and he has certain authorities that there's nothing stopping him from exercising them, like firing Jeff Sessions. And presidents have fired attorney generals and FBI directors before. Bill Clinton fired his FBI director the day before Vince Foster was murdered. And the body was dumped in Fort Marcy Park to put it in the jurisdiction of the Park Police. The Park Police solve a murder?
Yeah, that was a real disgrace. But as impatient as I've been over this whole FBI spying thing, it's almost smart the way it's smoking everybody out and exposing all these people. I know it's like a faucet dripping, but it's definitely really, it's kind of a Chinese water torture on these deep staters. They just, and the more we find out, the more people get exposed. It's kind of fun to watch. I mean, as much as I'd like to see them all get frog marched out tomorrow, this might be the better move. But anyway, I'll talk to you later, Mike. Thank you for taking my call.
All right. Thanks an awful lot, Joe. And we're going to let you go. Phone lines are open again. We're coming up here on another commercial break. Getting on back over to Israel. As you know, Benjamin Netanyahu is dealing with quite a few corruption scandals, and one of them has begun to surface again, if you'll pardon the allegation. And this one is the submarines affair. And it sort of had faded into the background with all the other more recent scandals like the Bezek affair. But it's bubbling up to the top again. And in the submarines affair, Miki Ganor, ThyssenKrupp's sales representative in Israel, as well as other top Israeli defense officials and top aides to Netanyahu, allegedly perpetrated fraud and skimmed off the top in a deal for Israel to buy nuclear submarines from the German company. And accused in the massive fraud are Netanyahu's lawyer and confidant, David Shimron, his top personal foreign envoy, Yitzhak Molko, and his former chief of staff, David Sharon, his deputy national security advisor, Avril Bar Yosef, and former Navy chief, Eliezer Meron. So Netanyahu's feeling the heat. We're going to take a break for commercials. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're talking about the scandal-plagued Benjamin Netanyahu, and along with the submarine scandal, which is re-emerging to plague him. Apparently, police investigators have evidence that Hollywood mogul Arnon Milken is suspected of giving bribes to Netanyahu in one case, and also acted as a middleman in a suspected illegal deal discussed by the Prime Minister and Yedioth Aharonoth publisher Arnon Moses in a separate case. Now, Arnon Milken, many years ago, was involved in a scandal acquiring what are called Krytron switches, which are these ultra-fast, ultra-precise triggering devices, and they have many applications, such as the machines that break up kidney stones, where you need the sound waves to be in perfect synchronization. In the days when copy machines flashed a light on the document, Krytrons were used there. But where they're used to evil intent, they're used to trigger the explosives in nuclear weapons, in a plutonium bomb, because those little explosive panels that surround the plutonium sphere have to go off exactly at the same instant, or you get a fizzle. So, getting on back to this, the Tel Aviv district prosecution believes that Netanyahu systematically demanded benefits worth about 1 million NIS, that's about $282,000 US, from Milken in so-called Case 1000. Now, Sarah Netanyahu has now been indicted for falsely charging the state $100,000 for meals. And she's been hit with an indictment for fraud with aggravated circumstances and breach of public trust. Now, when Leah Rabin was about to be indicted in 1977, then Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin resigned from office due to his wife's scandal. I don't see Netanyahu doing that, because if he steps down, then he loses a lot of the political pull and potential immunity he has for all these other corruption scandals going on. Meanwhile, the Freedom Flotilla ships have arrived in Lisbon. And, okay, the Freedom Flotilla ships have arrived at Lisbon, and they're just sailing on down the coast. They're going to go through the Straits of Gibraltar and head across the Mediterranean. It's symbolic. We know Israel's going to stop them. We hope that Israel will stop them without murdering them, which happened on the Mavi Marmara. But it is another way of calling attention to the plight of the people of Gaza, who have been kept in this giant open-air prison for all this time. Now, there is an English-language socialist newspaper in Great Britain called the Morning Star, and they had an article by John Elder, which was headlined, "Rising Anti-Semitism Cannot Be Tackled Without Addressing Israel's Crimes." And basically, in the article, he said that by failing to condemn Israel's brutality against Palestinians, that Jewish organizations around the world will be regarded by some as being indirectly complicit in Israel's actions and brutality against the Palestinians, which makes absolutely perfect sense, and the Morning Star took it down. But it's absolutely making the point here that it's time for the world to start dealing with Israel's crimes. And we have to get away from this utter nonsense that because of something we're told happened before we were all born in Germany, that we have some kind of an obligation to just let Israel do whatever they want to whoever they want. Shoot the Palestinians with butterfly bullets. Attack the USS Liberty. No, we're not under that obligation. Whatever happened in Germany or did not happen in Germany, we can't really be sure in this age of mendacity. It's irrelevant to what the current government of Israel is doing. And they keep screaming this anti-Semitism. We know it's a hoax, it's a fraud, it's a trick. We're not criticizing their religion. We're not criticizing their ethnicity. We're not even criticizing their culture. We are criticizing the actions of the individual people inside the government of Israel who are committing these atrocities. And nobody should be above criticism anywhere. That's what our First Amendment really means. That's why Israel is trying to attack our First Amendment. They want to carve out an Israel exception. You can have free speech in the United States, except about Israel. Don't you dare talk about them. We'll be right back after these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, yesterday, we were talking about how SecDef Mattis was out there whining about how America is losing its moral authority because of that evil Vladimir Putin. And I got some email responses to that, pointing out some of the things that Mattis has done that constitutes war crimes, especially over at Raqqa, where thousands of civilians were being killed. Even the pro-U.S. Human Rights Watch basically condemned the use of white phosphorus that was used to liberate Raqqa. They were just torching the place here. All right. A lot of people are scratching their heads over the fact that Madeleine Albright and Bana Alabed are to be honored for defending freedom. And it seems like once you've done the work of the deep state and you've spilled enough blood, you can look forward to a retirement full of absolutely gratuitous and pointless awards. And the pro-NATO Atlantic Council think tank is going to honor former U.S. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright at its Freedom Awards this week. Now, back in 1996, Madeleine Albright was interviewed on CBS television's 60 Minutes. It was the May 12th episode. And she was asked, quote, "We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And, you know, is the price worth it?" End quote. And Madeleine Albright replied, quote, "I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it." End quote. So, Russia is coming out with some new clever weapons, and one of their ideas was how to make weapon systems more modular to move from ship to ship. And rather than go the route that the U.S. tried to do on the Independence class and Freedom class littoral combat ships with this really complex modular system, which turned out not to work all that well, Russia has simply hit on the idea of putting their weapon systems in conventional shipping containers. for which the infrastructure to move them around already exists. And one example is the Club K anti-ship missiles, which are inside shipping containers and which, by the way, can be launched from inside those shipping containers. And Russia is already offering this for sale to export customers. Any coastal defense force on a budget can now have a well-camouflaged warship killer hidden in a civilian port. That would be one way of dealing with some of those Somali pirates, going after the cargo ships. Back when the Soviet Union was in Afghanistan, the Mujahideen used to have a saying that they were not afraid of the Russians, but they were afraid of the Russians' helicopters because they do make good helicopters. And the Pentagon has now basically hemmed and hawed and admitted that Russia's current helicopters are better than the United States' current helicopters. And I'm sure that that will be followed with a request for money to build a newer helicopter. Because we've got to close the helicopter gap. North Korea has now returned the remains of 200 U.S. soldiers who died at the start of the Korean War. And, of course, that was an issue that was raised at the summit with Kim Jong-un. And Trump is out there speechifying about it, saying, we got back our great fallen heroes, the remains sent back today. Well, until they're identified, we don't know if they're heroes or not. Not everybody in a war is a hero. But Trump is trying to maximize the political gain from this. He's trying to make it look like it's a major political victory. I could kind of imagine that North Korea was getting tired of storing all of this stuff. Probably glad to get rid of it. As North Korea and the United States start to negotiate on the issue of the nuclear weapons, apparently Andrea Hall, who's the National Security Council's top staff official on weapons of mass destruction, has basically resigned her position at the White House. So they're going to have to get somebody else. And she was considered a top person on this. And, you know, the issue is going to be who do they get who is knowledgeable enough to be able to go over there, look at the weapons and evaluate them, look at the production facilities and evaluate them as well. Now, that's assuming the negotiations are going to come through to the point where they say, let us now implement. And I still think a sticking point for North Korea is going to be the long-range missiles and the launch facilities. Because North Korea may be convinced that they can live without the nuclear weapons. But by looking at what the U.S. did in Libya, Syria, and Iraq, and is trying to do in Iran, North Korea has to understand they dare not surrender all of their weapons of deterrence. So we'll see what happens on that. Over in the South China Sea, French and British ships are now sailing through those island clusters in a show of solidarity with the United States and basically poking their finger in China's eye, just ramping up the tensions there a little bit more. So let's talk about our domestic politics here. There's a lot going on here. And over at Robert Mueller's investigation, he's in a kettle of trouble with these indictments against these Russian companies, which he just thought they'd go to court, the Russians wouldn't show up, he'd get a default judgment, that would be the end of the story. And attorneys for one of the Russian companies, Concord Management, have come on into court and begun the process of discovery. Now, discovery means that prosecutors are obligated to share with defense lawyers all of the actual evidence in a case. And ever since the Concord Management lawyers showed up, Robert Mueller's lawyers have been trying to stonewall. They even tried to get the judge to issue this ridiculous blanket cover saying, no, we don't have to share what we've got, which violates the whole principle of discovery. And it's beginning to look more and more like Mueller didn't actually have a case. He just found a bunch of Russian companies and said they were running troll farms to help Donald Trump during the election. There's the proof of the Trump-Russia collusion. And now he's stuck. If he proceeds on the case, the judge is going to realize there's no case there, and he's going to throw it out of court. If Mueller unsuits, if he withdraws his lawsuits and his indictment, it's going to look just as bad. He's in a real corner. Now, over at the National Enquirer, federal authorities have subpoenaed the publisher, and they're asking for records related to a $150,000 payment to a former Playboy model for the rights to her story alleging an affair with Donald Trump. And the subpoena from Manhattan federal prosecutors requesting information from a publisher, American Media Incorporated, about its August 2016 payment to Karen McDougal is part of a broader criminal investigation of Mr. Trump's former personal lawyer, Michael Cohen. I don't see how that would be germane, but we'll have to take a look at that. But again, they're back digging in the gutter, trying to find something that they can use to tarnish Donald Trump. And again, I don't agree with Donald Trump playing around on his wife with a Playboy model or anybody else. But it really is irrelevant. It doesn't affect my life, as opposed to things like Trump's policies on immigration and certainly the wars and the economy. So let us stay focused. Now, as I mentioned to that caller before, Obama's cyber chief, his cybersecurity czar, confirmed yesterday that former National Security Advisor Susan Rice told him to stand down in response to what were claimed to be Russian cyber attacks during the 2016 presidential campaign. This is coming from Michael Daniel. His title was Cybersecurity Coordinator. And when he was testifying before the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, basically confirmed the story. Susan Rice ordered to stand down. The Russians are hacking the Democrats' computers. No, you don't want to look at that. Well, obviously, the Russians weren't the hackers, or there wouldn't be a stand down order. Somebody else was hacking into the computers, somebody trying to help Hillary Clinton and harm Bernie Sanders, certainly. Yesterday we were talking about how the Southern Poverty Law Center is facing some serious trouble. It all began when the Southern Poverty Law Center issued an apology and agreed to a settlement to Majid Nawaz and his Quillim Foundation for basically smearing them. And that's now triggered a lot of other people to stand up and say, well, the Southern Poverty Law Center has done this before. They're not really a credible source, and yet, of course, the corporate media keeps going to them all the time when they need to launder a smear attack. That's basically what Southern Poverty Law Center does. It launders smear attacks. We need to smear what really happened as being dangerous. Well, we'll get Southern Poverty Law Center to do it. And yesterday we reported that there are 60 organizations who have been incorrectly branded as hate groups or otherwise smeared, and they're considering legal action. And now it's looking like they may join together into a class action. And if it goes into a class action, I might just step on in. Because while I make fun of the fact that the Southern Poverty Law Center attacked my website incorrectly, I think I'd like to get in on this one and get a little bit of payback here. Just a little bit of payback. All right. Now then, so today we're looking at Southern Poverty Law Center. They've got money. They're always out there begging for more. They've got money. It turns out that they've got something like $90 million in offshore funds. That's a lot of money. And it's offshore, which makes it look even more nefarious. Now, do you remember Cheryl Atkinson? She had been with TV News Network, was dismissed, and now she's becoming a campaigner for improving media in general, and she's come out with a book. And according to Atkinson, the research that she carried out for her book to source the provenance of the term fake news led her to a nonprofit organization funded by Google, whose parent company Alphabet was at the time chaired by Eric Schmidt. Eric Schmidt was one of Hillary Clinton's top campaign strategists and donors during Clinton's 2016 presidential run. So Atkinson came on out and said that a smear artist told her nearly every image that crosses your path on a daily basis, whether it's on the news, on a billboard, or on a late-night comedy show, all of it is there for a reason, often by somebody who paid a lot of money for it to be there. And Atkinson is scathing of public relations and law firms for forwarding one narrative or one idea which are rooted in political causes that are often undisclosed. She said, right now, the smear industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry that targets personalities or organizations with dissenting voices that the establishment wishes to shut down. So lying for the government is big, big business. Another criticism coming from FFF.org is the pro-war media deserve criticism and not sainthood. And this is in response to the recent Steven Spielberg movie, The Post, which was the retelling of the Pentagon Papers story. It was released with a huge amount of fanfare and promotion, and it's a well-done movie. But we're talking about a totally different time in the past, in the days when the Washington Post actually had the courage to run stories like the Pentagon Papers or Watergate. But the media hoopla around the Post, I mean, the Washington Post today, it's like an old geezer boasting about things that he did when he was a kid 50 years ago. That Washington Post doesn't exist any longer. It's been taken over. It's been compromised. And like the rest of the corporate media, its main business, its stock in trade, is lying to you here. All right, let's get back to Peter Fonda. I'm still incensed over what this guy did. And Donald Trump Jr. has come on out swinging, in a virtual sense, against Peter Fonda by saying, you're clearly a sick individual and everyone is an internet badass, but rather than attack an 11-year-old like a bully and a coward, why don't you pick on someone a bit bigger? LMK, which is Twitter speak for let me know. So good for Donald Trump Jr. to be standing up for his brother and going after Fonda. Now, Fonda was probably a little reckless in doing this because it's dragged up the fact that back in 2009, when Roman Polanski was arrested in Switzerland for raping a 13-year-old girl, Fonda, who had a daughter of his own, defended Polanski's sex with a child, saying his arrest was an outrage, and it's not like Polanski killed the girl. So that's the kind of guy this liberal is. So apparently Fonda was out there saying we should have been celebrating the arrest of Osama bin Laden and not the arrest of Polanski. And normally I don't do entertainment news here, but Fonda has really annoyed me. All right, we'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. So we're seeing like Kathy Griffin and Peter Fonda putting up these comments on social media, and they're left there because, after all, these are liberals and they're out for Trump. And the hypocrisy is rather stunning because Twitter and Facebook have both deleted the Trump fan network. No warning, no reason, just gone. And that's why I keep telling people, you might as well stop using the corporate social media. It's totally under the control of the liberals. They want to create themselves a little safe space where they can think the whole world is liberal like them, and they don't have to deal with us conservatives who live in the real world. Now, speaking of corporate media and yellow journalism, GQ magazine did an interview with Donald Trump Jr. and basically asked him if he ever wanted to have sex with his mother, which is on the same level as have you stopped beating your wife. Now, the person who wrote this, Julia, I think that's Loffe, she was fired a little over a year ago from Politico for making similarly prurient accusations against the First Family, suggesting that President Trump was having sex with his daughter Ivanka. And after being fired over that, she joined the Atlantic staff, and she also writes for other publications, including GQ magazine. Now, apparently, GQ researcher Andrew Federoy, acting on behalf of Julia, emailed a series of fact-checking questions to the Trump Organization's official press request email address. And the email, this is being reported by Breitbart, by the way, included normal questions about the president's son's well-known love for fishing and various other non-controversial questions. But then right in the middle came the zinger. Was there ever a time when Donald Trump Jr. felt any Oedipal impulses, referring to the Oedipus complex, which is the name given to boys who do sexually fixate on their mothers? So talk about yellow journalism. And this Julia, even after losing her job over this kind of shenanigans, just can't quit. We're gonna make him look bad. And that's not what journalism is. And it's rather amazing. At the time I took journalism in college, I didn't take it all that seriously. I mean, I did the work, I did the reporting, and but I look back on that, and I look at what passes for journalism today, and it's clearly mutated. I remember when the Second Iraq War was underway, and there were protests in the streets, and the news crew for the local NBC affiliate basically drove up and parked right next to our anti-war demonstration, walked through our anti-war demonstration without stopping to get to the pro-war demonstration on the other side. Did their story, came on back, again, walked right past the anti-war demonstration, didn't stop, got in the van and drove away. That's not how you provide news to the public. We're going to take a break for station identification, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. So we're looking at people like Samantha Bee and Kathy Griffin and Peter Fonda and and Robert De Niro. Can't leave him off there. And I was saying the other day, the optics are looking really, really bad. And it's backed up by this article that came out of Zero Hedge, saying that U.S. liberals are clinically insane and they care nothing for the American people. And the article is basically looking at the sheer hysteria coming out of the liberals ever since Hillary's surprise loss in 2016. And Russiagate is falling apart. They didn't get any traction with that. Trump is starting to look good to ordinary Americans, trying to restart the Heartland's industrial sector. He's looking good from Kim Jong-un, even though nothing concrete's actually been accomplished yet. But he's looking really good. He looks like he's got ideas. And even if you don't agree with the ideas, it's better to have somebody who's at least got some ideas to work with. And the Democrats don't. They played 2016 purely on identity politics and victimhood. And the Democrats are starting to panic. The polls for the November elections are shifting toward the GOP. And as the Democrats get more and more desperate, they're showing a side of their character that is distasteful to the American people. It's childish. It's potentially treacherous. And it's really showing up in that entertainment industry. And I don't know if the Democrats really have a leader that can talk to Democrats and to these liberals and say, cut it out, because you're making things worse. Now, this is a very alarming story. It came out of Reason.com. The American Civil Liberties Union, apparently, according to a leaked internal memo, is considering pulling back on the issue of free speech. And according to this memo, they're saying our defense of speech may have a greater or lesser harmful impact on the equality and justice work to which we are also committed. Now, this was a supposedly confidential memo obtained by former board member Wendy Kaminer. Now, this is a cowardly retreat from the ACLU's historical defense of the First Amendment. And it shows that the ACLU is now becoming politically correct. Yes, you can have freedom of speech. You just can't talk about this, and you can't talk about that, and you can't talk about those, and you can't talk about this over here. Well, that's not freedom of speech. That's permitted speech. And I'm rather surprised to see the ACLU even considering going down this road of saying that free speech can be blocked and suspended in certain cases. All right, apparently Donald Trump is heading to Great Britain next month and will meet with Queen Elizabeth. They're describing it as very symbolic. And apparently this is happening despite the royal family's very chilly attitude toward Trump. And I'm not sure where that's coming from. Great Britain is going populist and nationalist despite the efforts of the government. I don't know, maybe Queen Elizabeth wants to stay hooked up to Europe. But Trump is going to go there and meet with her and be very gracious about it. Oh, and here's another one. This is from TruePundit.com. There is a Canadian comedy writer. He's got a Hollywood resume. Apparently, he's living in Hollywood right now. It's called Pat DeSalt. And DeSalt tweeted out yesterday a tweet declaring that he and others were coming for baby Chloe, the granddaughter. Yeah, and liberals insist we conservative gun owners are the dangerous ones. I hope the Secret Service gets this guy. I mean, yes, Trump is a disappointment, but you don't go after the kids. You don't threaten the kids. You don't behave like this. This kind of behavior is thugism. This is what the brown shirts used to do in Nazi Germany. It's un-American to behave like that. Just stop it now. All right, let's talk about the economic news here. I'm a little late getting to it because of all the other stuff going on here. It was a bad day on the Dow. The Dow ended 196 down. The markets were all in the red. This is continuing an unending series of red days, although yesterday the NASDAQ and S&P were up a little bit, but they're heavily in the red today. We're going to do a shout out now to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. India and Russia are going to join China in the currency and trade war. And some analysts are attempting to basically blame them for the declining stock market and say it's all their fault. It's economic war. I have a somewhat different look on that. And I'm trying to figure this out, why the stock market would be going down in a trade war. because the whole point of the trade war is to stimulate American companies to start making products for American consumption. And I would think that investors would be basically buying stock in those American manufacturers, and that should be pushing the market up. So something is not quite making sense there. According to this article over in Sputnik News, analysts are saying that what the United States is aiming to do with this trade war with China is to drive foreign investments out of China. To basically send a message, China's not going to be making any money, don't put your money in there. It's not working just yet. Meanwhile, Russia has bought another 600,000 ounces of gold. Well, actually, they did that in May after dumping half of their U.S. treasuries in April. And, of course, they just dumped another huge bunch of treasuries just a short while ago, and probably they're going to put that into gold as well. And that's a very, very smart thing to do. Now, getting back on over to Korea, there is an economic dimension to what is going on, and it is the rare earth elements. And North Korea has reportedly found one of the world's biggest deposits, 150 kilometers from Pyongyang. And this may be another factor behind the recent thaw. Better to go on in and get those rare earth elements as a business than to try and conquer North Korea. And, you know, it's how do we get them the cheapest? So basically what they've got are all these rare earth elements. You know, right now China is believed to control over 95% of global production of rare earth metals, with an estimated 55 million tons in deposits. North Korea is estimated to hold at least 20 million tons. So this might be as much about breaking the Chinese monopoly on rare earth elements to be able to acquire them for much less cost, which means our future iPhones and stuff should, in theory, be a little less expensive. Assuming, well, there's going to be a tariff on the iPhones from now on. That's something probably a lot of people don't realize. These tariffs that are hitting China, they're on a whole range of products, and they're spreading. Every day there's another tariff on one side or the other, and eventually it's going to hit things like the iPhone, the iPad. Getting on back to poor Tesla, and boy, they're having a very rough time. The other day there was a fire, and Elon Musk came on out and said they'd identified a saboteur as a he. Now, they're not saying that this guy actually set the fire. It sounds to me like the fire and the announcement of a saboteur basically happened at the same time. But a former employee, Martin Tripp, is being sued in civil court, alleging he hacked into Tesla's system, transferred data to third parties, and gave false leaks to the media. Tripp, in an interview in the Washington Post, is saying that he acted as a whistleblower, calling attention to some really scary things at the firm, alleging that dangerously punctured batteries were installed in Model 3 cars. Now, step one, we look at the batteries and see if they're really punctured. Because this guy might be telling the truth, and he might be engaging in corporate sabotage. A lot of the existing car companies, they're afraid of Tesla. They're afraid of all the electric cars, unless they're making them. And it wouldn't be the first time that the established automakers ganged up on somebody. There was a movie that came out, I think, about 20 years ago called Tucker, A Man and His Dream. And it was a very well-made movie based on the true story of the Tucker Torpedo, which was this amazing car that was so far ahead of its time. It had windows that would pop out on impact. It had safety glass. It had seat belts before anybody else had them. It had a headlight that would turn with the steering wheel, so that you're actually looking at the road you're driving down at night rather than off into the forest. It was incredibly ahead of its time. And it basically got brought down by a conspiracy by the then big three automakers. And here's the kicker. Most of those Tucker torpedoes are still on the road. They're still drivable today. They were one of the most well-built cars that the United States ever produced. And that's why they had to go, because cars are supposed to die after 5 years, because you have to buy another car. All righty, getting on over to Europe and immigration and so forth. Bavaria has now rejected Angela Merkel's plan of paying out more money to the Eurozone. The latest plan right now between Germany and France is they're talking about the refugees should stay in the countries where they're first registered and not be allowed to take advantage of the Schengen free travel, because that's what's causing a lot of the problems. The refugees are coming into countries that are welcoming them in, and then once they're in, they go to other countries that frankly wish they wouldn't show up. But Merkel is still dealing with this Bavarian insurrection, if you will, and she's running out of time. And Bavaria is actually starting to talk about independence. And they used to be an independent nation. They're very proud of that. When I was there back in the 1980s, even back then you could see there was this, yeah, we're part of Germany, kind of, sort of, maybe, that was out there. Merkel apparently realizes she's in trouble. So like any good politician, she's going to shift the story. And she's out there screaming, we need measures against Iran's aggressive tendencies in the Middle East. Oh? Who's bombing who? Who's drone striking who? What is Iran? Who has Iran invaded? Who has Iran bombed? So, again, nothing is going to save a falling political career like a good war. Okay. The House of Lords, we did mention this yesterday, they have finally passed Britain's new version of the Brexit bill that does basically lay out the path for a smooth Brexit. And that is basically it. This ends months of parliamentary debate on the issue and last-ditch efforts to get Parliament to have a final veto. And the House of Lords approved the bill by a simple majority. So it's a done deal. Brexit is happening, and all of George Soros's horses and all of George Soros's men are not going to be able to put the EU back together again. Over in Italy, they have voted in, as you know, a populist government in response to the refugee crisis. It's caused a lot of damage in their country, a lot of economic harm. And they voted in this populist government that basically are adopting policies that overturn the post-war European order. Not just being anti-EU and anti-refugee, but basically pulling on out from a lot of other sort of accepted, established relationships. And Italy's austerity measures, which have been imposed on the Italian people, have pushed a lot of the Italians right down into poverty, with the poverty rate doubling over the course of just the last decade. And the fact that Italy, being one of the southern European countries, was taking the brunt of the refugees coming on in. So I'm not surprised they voted in a populist government. And I know up at the Bilderberg conference, that is a main topic of their discussions. Oh my goodness, the people are actually standing up and they're voting, and they're voting in for nationalists. Ooh, horrible nationalists. And we're starting to see literally a war between the globalists and the nationalists break into public view. And it's probably going to get very intense. The nationalists just want to be left alone. Just go away. That's all I want. The globalists have been building for this for decades. And they're feeling like they're so close to it right now. And I don't think they're ready to give up just yet. Now, there's an article over in Diversity Macht Frei, which basically is saying that throughout the ages in the past, we've seen the Jewish people collaborating with Muslims and Asiatics against Christians and Europeans and celebrating their victories over them. And they're seeing a recurring pattern where apparently certain Jewish organizations and rabbis are out there celebrating that Europe is becoming less and less Christian. It's a new Muslim conquest of London. Huzzah, 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 huzzah. Now, do you remember when Italy rejected that boat of 600 refugees and said, we can't let them in? We don't have the room, we don't have the supply. If we let them in, there'll be another boat the next day. And finally, Spain was convinced to take the boat in. Well, guess what happened? In order to provide accommodation for the boat migrants, students have been kicked out of their dormitories at the Florida de Alicante University. Now, they're paying 750 euros a month for these dorms. They've been told to just find someplace else to go because the boat people are going to get these rooms. This is, I should point out, when finals are taking place in the universities, when these students need undisturbed focus time to study to get the best possible grades. So this is a double whammy. Not only are they losing their home, their studying for the finals has been disrupted. It's going to have a negative impact. And I don't know about you, but I'm really getting kind of fed up with all of these liberal globalist governments who are willing to just put the needs of these refugees and illegal immigrants above the needs of their own people. They're willing to harm their own people, disrupt their lives so they can go along with this liberal fantasy land. Open your eyes, people. Take a look at what's happening across Europe. Take a look at what's happening in your own backyards here in the United States of America. The country is going down. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're talking about how Spain is literally kicking students out of their dorm rooms during finals to make way for the boat people. And to add insult to injury, Italy is now demanding that Spain take in the next 4 migrant boats. All right, let's take a phone call here from Dave in Missouri. Aloha, Dave. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Howdy, Mike. Hope you're having a blessed day today.
Yep.
Dude, it's just the insanity, man. I mean, I was pretty upset when this IG report come out, which was such an obvious whitewash. But what we have got into now is that they are so steeped in criminality, they being the Justice Department, the Obama feds, the DNC, so steeped in criminality and fraud that even their whitewash exposes who they are, exposes that Hillary didn't get a proper investigation. She was cut breaks you and I would never get. It was absolutely subverted by the brass that she got a proper investigation, and that the FBI was so totally biased against Trump. I mean, all of that is coming out in the light of day in this IG whitewash. So it's like they've gone so far down the hole now that they can't even, there's no amount of toilet paper, Mike, to clean these people up. But they don't care how they look. And that's the craziest thing to me. I have never in my life seen a group of people so happy to be covered in feces, smiling at each other, looking like criminal jokes, absolutely blatant liars, thieves, and frauds, and still they are, as of now, unscathed. So I really think this is the death of the DNC. If it's not, it is the death of America. If we don't get some sanity back in all of this so we can have faith in our Justice Department, that our FBI isn't just a tool, of political agendas. I mean, if we don't do something to regain credibility in the architecture, infrastructure, leadership of the country, man, it's just over. And I want to say this too, is that I'm actually kind of proud of Trump at the moment. Yes, he does a lot of missteps, but you know, he's been a lot cooler about this than I know I could have been, Mike, and probably you, when they've just been screaming insults in his face, now threatening his children and grandchildren. I mean, how would you act? You know, but here he is, stepping back, trying to take care of business as he sees it needs to be done. Nothing he ever does is going to be good enough for these whack jobs. But, you know, what are they doing? And so at the end of the day, he's being far classier. He's really controlling his temperament. And to me, he's showing himself to be a leader like we've never really seen before. I mean, I'd go after these people with a meat cleaver. I don't know what you do, but threaten my son, threaten my grandbaby, dude, I'm bringing a chainsaw. I mean, I'm going to redecorate your living room, you know? And so, but he's not doing that, you know? And so I just don't understand how these people can look so absolutely disgusting and despicable to anybody with eyeballs and then stand up on their feet and get back in front of a camera again. But I do want to give kudos to Trump for not taking their bait and let this all play out so that they look like the feces-covered frauds that they are. And that was really all I had. I was going to say something else about the Fed. Mike, you know, if we don't zero out these hundreds of trillions dollars worth of derivatives, if we don't get rid of the Fedster banksters, if we don't reclaim our own money system again, we're hanging our children. And we have failed to be men at this time when it is most critical, and we're going to watch our children be marched off into their futures with no hope because we were not men enough to stand up to these bankster frauds and take our country back. I love you. I love the people of RBN. Please support RBN. And I'm going to hang up and let you see what you say. I'm driving, so I got to go.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot here. And I still think that we're heading for a big crash. The economy is overstretched. We know that the official figures are fiction. And if you're getting into the investment market and you rely on those official figures, then you're a fool. But you're right. The debt is just completely off the charts. The derivatives exposure, when it goes, it's going to go all the way. And it's going to take the federal government down with it. And that's the time when the American people are going to have to stand up and stand firm and say, we will now decide what country will be built here. And going back to that Constitution...
Can you still hear me?
I'm sorry, yes?
Oh, okay. I didn't know if I'd been lost. You know, you'd said something about the Chinese dumping treasuries. Dude, I don't want to let them buy with that. I mean, they looted the American middle class, you know, with the Waltons and Klein and Clintons and, you know, all the mindless Walmart shoppers. They looted and destroyed our country economically. So why should we let them bail out of those treasuries? Zero it out. Leave them holding nothing like they've left us holding nothing but junk for our landfills. So, yeah, I mean, I have no sympathy
Dave,
for the Chinese in that situation. Yes,
Dave,
yes,
I got to let you go. Got to take another break for commercials. I'll respond to your call when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And responding to Dave, your view of what's going on with China and the treasuries is a little overly simplistic, because China didn't come on over to the United States and force stores to carry their products. The decision to let American manufacturing decline and to rely on foreign sources for products was made by American management to improve their bottom line. That was it. And China made, huge amounts of money off of the deal because the U.S. was buying much more from them than China was buying from us. And so they reinvested that money in the treasuries, and that's how that came to be. All right, we have a caller on the line here. Patrick in England, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, hello, Mike. Long time no speak. Yes, just really responding to you, just really about the Brexit matter. I mean, you may not know, maybe you do, but this is really a case of, you know, those classic lines from Hotel California, you can check out any time you want, but you can never leave. Basically, they're really doing. It may have gone through the Parliament with a slight majority that we're going to leave, but they're doing all they can to fudge it and to drag the matter out into the long grass. We're already signed up into payments into the future, but for several years, still there's huge leaving payments. They're arguing over having a soft Brexit rather than a hard Brexit, whereas we leave in name only, but we're signed up all to the single market, which means we can't have treaties elsewhere. This whole monster. I mean, we've been paying over the last 40 years. I mean, it's something at the moment. It's like £50 million a day collected mainly through VAT, which of course disproportionately discriminates against the poor. Countless billions in costs to businesses over the past 40 years in complying with ever-changing thousands of directives governing every area of our lives. We're caught in a minefield at the moment. Even churches have got this data thing at the moment where we have to contact everyone to ask their permission to do this and to do that, to basically sneeze. So they're doing all they can to fudge it. Yes, so you may read in the headlines that, yes, we've left, we're leaving and whatever, but it's really a case at the moment, unless a miracle happens, that you can check out any time you want, but you can never leave. Classic lines.
Well, I understand there are a lot of very powerful forces who want to keep Britain aligned with the EU, and you're right, it could turn out to be Brexit in name only. But at that point, I think the British people need to decide what they're going to do about a government that absolutely refuses to serve their best interests in favor of the globalists.
We're too lethargic. We're too lethargic. People are just too busy. They're too lethargic. All the main options all are in favour. And the Conservatives certainly pay lip service to leaving. But Theresa May. She's weak. They're absolutely fudging it and dragging it out into the long grass and burying it, and all these action groups that I reckon they delayed it deliberately to allow all these action groups to challenge it through the High Court and everything. And we voted for this 2 years ago, and we did not vote to have soft Brexit or hard Brexit. We voted to leave the European Union, and everyone, all the commentators at the time, spoke and said, yes, that means we are leaving everything to do with it. We go back to pre-1972 when we weren't in the common market or anything. We had a clean leave, and that's basically what it means. That's what we voted for, and we've gradually watched this whole thing morph into this absolute monster. It's set up on the Soviet model, like with its council of minister, with its commission and its executive. It's a kind of Soviet type of model. There's no democracy. There's no true say. You can't get rid of the commission. They're looking at charging us now for visas to visit Europe. And they are desperate for it not to happen. So, I mean, yes, I mean, we're too lethargic. We're too lethargic to go out and rail on the streets about this. So, and I think the politicians know that. So, that's the score at the moment.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that. I mean, I know that they're going to drag this out for years into the future, and the EU is going to try and suck as much money out of Great Britain as they can, because up until recently, Great Britain and Germany have been carrying the economic load for pretty much the rest of the EU. And once Britain stops sending that money, I'm pretty sure the people of Germany aren't going to want to carry that entire load themselves. So, but you know, we may see the EU break up over the refugee crisis anyway, and then Britain will be free and clear to just go on off and do what they want to do anyway. Let's hope for the best.
Yeah, we'll see. But at the moment, you see, we actually buy more from them than they buy from us. So we hold all the trump cards, pardon the pun. But I mean, you know, but they still want to negotiate, and they're not being amicable, and they're deliberately, you know, hardballing us, and you know, and Theresa, as I say, they're weak, and we've got a secret Remainer in charge. Theresa May has made it very clear that she's a Remainer. So how can we have the Prime Minister who's in charge of negotiating this as a closet Remainer? She's made her, you know, so that's what we've got at the moment. So that's all, Mike. Have a good rest of the day.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the phone call, and good luck getting free of the globalists, which is really what it's coming on down to. It's a war between nationalism and globalism, and I'm on the side of nationalism, which means I'll probably get emails saying, "Ooh, you're a Nazi." I get those all the time anyway. So basically, we're looking at next week's EU summit. and they're trying to find a common EU asylum policy before the summit. A lot of people are saying that would pretty much take a miracle. Merkel is out there trying to find bilateral solutions. That's no easy task, and if she comes up short, her coalition falls apart, she is out of a job. Now, there's this article that came out of The Guardian. Europe's Democrats must unite to prevent a far-right takeover. Apparently, in Europe, the left wing are the, well, anyway. But basically, the globalists are panicking. And they're out there saying we have to stop this rush toward populism and nationalism, which we know is coming out of the Bilderbergers. All right, we're going to take another phone call. We've got Martin in California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hi, Mike. I just first want to say I've been following you on your website since maybe 2003, 2004, and been listening to your show back when you were on RBN on Saturdays. So I've been listening to you for a long time. And, you know, I love the way you do web aggregation, I think is a word, for pulling together all these news stories and just really get me informed without having to go to a bunch of different places. I definitely support you. But I don't agree with everything of your opinions. And the issue I wanted to talk to you about is tariffs today.
Okay.
I do support tariffs, or at least threatening to impose tariffs. And here's why. Today I'm traveling, so I picked up a USA Today paper, and it's mostly all anti-Trump. In the business section, it has an article about USA, or Volvo's CEO Samuelson told USA Today that he supports ending no tariffs on vehicles. But then further down in this article, it says Trump imposed 25% tariffs on vehicles imported from China, of which there are few. Chinese sales of U.S.-made vehicles, on the other hand, totaled about 267,000. Okay? Then the next thing, it says China, which is lowering most global vehicle tariffs from 25% to 15%, is set to retaliate. Well, I don't believe that. I believe that what Trump is doing is he's matching China's 25% that they have had on vehicle tariffs, and he's forcing China to lower their tariffs so that we are not dealing in an uneven playing field.
Well, see, here's the problem. Here's the problem. I mean, I understand that tariffs are useful to balance the economies of trading nations here, but the playing field is not level because China is a manufacturing powerhouse, and we're just getting restarted. And until our manufacturing is really ready to come online, it's not a good time to be starting a tariff war. And when you add in the tremendous debt this nation is under, it makes our economy fragile. There are experts out there saying that this trade war could plunge us into a new recession by next year.
That is the opinion of the mainstream media.
Yes.
Besides, I mean, his tweets and the like, I don't know what's making that noise, is that Trump is using this as, number one, a negotiating tariff. He really doesn't want to impose these high tariffs on foreign companies. He wants them to stop imposing their tariffs on U.S. products. And these countries, it's barely reported in the press, have outrageously high tariffs on U.S. products. You know, I work for a company that makes scientific instruments, been around for 50 years. We're doing really well this year. We're going up from 150 million to about 200 million in revenue. And we sell all over the world. And I know I'm not in that financial part of it. I'm in the engineering part of it. But I'm telling you that tariffs are high in China, in Europe, on what we send over there. And Trump's move is not to raise those tariffs, it's to bring them down so that we are playing on an equal playing field.
Well, I hope you're right, and I hope you're able to get that done.
Yeah, Yeah, I really do too. I know he's got the deck stacked against him, like all of his policies.
He's also seems
really,
to be doing some
miscalculations.
You know, I think he's miscalculated on some of this stuff. But time will solve that mystery. Anyway, we're running out of time. So, Martin, I'm going to let you go because we've got other callers waiting on the line.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
All right. Have a good day. Frank in Utah. Aloha, Frank. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, buddy. How you doing today?
Doing fine.
Awesome. Hey, I only got a couple things to say. Actually, just probably one. You know what? It's kind of irritating to me that, you know what, we live in a system. We talk about making everybody free, but we're not free ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? And, yeah. So, you know what? My car ain't free. I have a vehicle that's paid for, but yet every year I have to go around and pay for, you know, some crap that I have to pay to the state. It's my property tax. It's the same damn thing, you know, every year. I don't want to sound like a mean individual, but man, my gosh, you know what? We want to free the rest of the people in all these wars, but yet we're not free ourselves.
We're not making these people free in all these wars. That's just the propaganda being fed to you. These wars are all about conquering other people's wealth, pipeline rights of way, and, you know, eliminating political influence in certain parts of the world. The United States is facing the world going back to being multipolar. They don't like that. Israel wants to dominate the Middle East, and they succeeded in getting the U.S. to smash Iraq. Now their gun sights are on Iran. We're not fighting these wars to make anybody free. In fact, wars are being fought to conquer and enslave the people.
I do have a question for you.
Yeah.
So when you had your car stolen and you had to go out and buy a new car, did you ask the dealer for an MSO?
I don't even know what that is.
Well, manufacturer statement of origin. That means where that car was produced, and you actually get the original title to that car. It does not go to the state of Hawaii. What like mine, it would go to the state of Utah. So, you know, you can get where you pay it off. Do you actually own that vehicle? No, you do not. It's like you can have a piece of property. I have 10 acres on this mountain. Do I own this? No, I do not. I have to pay the man every year to pay my property tax. Do I own it? So what's the problem here?
Well, I understand what you're saying. You're viewing these taxes as a form of rent, and maybe that's the way to go. But with regard to the car, Frank, with regard to the car, with regard to my car, which is paid for, the cost of the rent, meaning the registration fee, is relatively small. And I'm not going to start screaming hysterically about that. Any nation on earth where you live, the government is going to be confiscating part of your wealth. There's a level of such confiscation which is comfortable and acceptable for everybody, but as governments turn toward tyranny, the degree of confiscation becomes predatory. And starts driving people into property instead of a share and share alike.
All right, here's the thing. Can I say something?
Real quick, because we're almost at the commercial break.
Well, that's fine. Now I'll only make this quick. Maybe I'll start listening to you when you freaking start understanding where your true wealth comes from. And you know, hey, I love RBN. And I'll tell you what, I've been listening for over 12 years. But I'll tell you what, the minute we start standing up for our true beliefs and what the hell is going on here, hey, we have no freedom. You can believe in what you want, but I'll tell you what, we're living in a scam. So thank you. and I appreciate your time.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here, and we're coming up on a commercial break. We've got one more caller waiting on the line, but I'm going to wait till after the commercial break on that. We're seeing more and more articles pointing on out how all across the United States, these illegal immigrants that are being brought into this country are being sent to states or districts rather that are just slightly red in order to shift them to blue. In other words, because existing voters won't give the liberals what they want, they're importing new voters, illegal voters, but a vote is a vote is a vote is a vote. We're going to take a break here. We'll be right back with the last segment of our program. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, last segment of our program today here, and we're going to take one more phone call. Joe in Alaska. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha. I've spent over half of my 62 years on this planet in Alaska, and there's been no love lost between me and Senator Ted Stevens. But I've always heard about this special relationship between Alaska and Hawaii. And I'm wondering how you interpret that. I assume it has something to do with Daniel Inouye. He was a Democrat, was he not?
Yeah, I believe he was, yes. But I think the special relationship is because we were the last two states added to the Union, and we were added at the same time because nobody could work out a flag design with 49 stars.
Okay, well, I had kind of considered that it had more to do with the military, which we're both on the frontier in that regard.
Yes.
And I thought it strange, this latest revelation that Stevens and Inouye and Reed in Nevada got $22 million to study anomalous aerospace threats. Back in, I'm not sure how long ago it was, but
well, it has to be a while because Inouye passed away a while back.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure. Well, Stevens passed away not too long ago, also.
Okay.
And I'm thinking, now that those two out of the way, and Harry Reid's the only one left, suddenly we find out that this goes back to balloons all over again. The $22 million apparently went to Bob Bigelow building space balloons or something, but that's not what Tom DeLonge is saying. He's saying that they're studying UFOs.
Well, there's a lot of stuff out there, and it could be a cover story for something else. I mean, generally when they have a project like that, there'll be an outside cover story to get people looking in the wrong way. If you go back and you look at the history of black aircraft development in the United States, you will find out that anytime there was an aircraft that had hit the testing phase, there'd always be a movie about UFOs or a TV series about space aliens, so that if anybody happened to see the test aircraft up there in the sky, they would leap to the conclusion they were seeing a UFO, and they'd go tell everybody, I saw a flying saucer, and they would be ignored. Including by possible foreign agents in our country. And what they wouldn't do is look at that little hangar out at the end of that seemingly abandoned airstrip out in the middle of the desert. So there's a lot of that going on. Anyway, listen, Joe, I got to let you go. The music is playing, so stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got a lot of stuff to share with you. Please share what you learn here with everyone that you know. And again, don't even waste your time with social media. It's being totally filtered. We have to identify some better social media for us all to use together to bring our network, our community back together in a place where freedom of speech is still respected. So we'll be back here tomorrow, and aloha, America.